People feel sorry for a woman alone at 70. They see her at the restaurant table for one and think, how sad. They see her boarding a plane by herself and think, who let her? They see her paying her own bills and managing her own money and hiring her own plumber, and they say, bless her heart, she has no one. They say it gently, the way you speak about something broken. But here's what they don't see. A woman at 79, sitting in a silent apartment with the television off, not reaching for the phone, not reaching for anyone, perfectly still, perfectly whole. It was 2005, October. I was sitting at the kitchen table in Silver Spring, Maryland, the same table where I'd served dinner every night for 34 years, and I was staring at a stack of envelopes I had never opened. Electric bill, gas bill, mortgage statement, insurance. Every single one addressed to Gerald Mackey or Gerald and Lorraine Mackey. And I remember picking up the electric bill, and my hands were shaking. Not because I was scared, because it felt foreign, like holding someone else's mail. Except it was mine. It had always been mine, I just never touched it. Jerry had been gone 6 days. Not dead, moved out. The divorce was final, and he'd taken his recliner and his golf clubs, and that was that. 34 years, and what I was left with was a kitchen table and a stack of paper I didn't know how to read. And I heard my mother-in-law's voice, Helen Mackey, God rest her. She told me something the year Jerry and I got married. She said, a woman doesn't need to understand the money. She needs to understand her husband. I believed that for 34 years. I want you to hear me say that. 34 years I believed that sentence, and it almost buried me. Now, if you're a woman who's ever let someone else hold the keys to your own life, and I mean that literally, the keys, the accounts, the passwords, the decisions, stay with me, because I held nothing for 34 years, and I'm still here. I'm 79 years old, and I'm still here, and I'm going to tell you 6 things I learned to do without a man. Not because men are bad, Jerry wasn't bad, but because every single one of these things nearly killed me to learn, and every single one of them saved my life. Let's start with the one that terrified me most. Number 1. I learned to manage my own money. And I don't mean I learned to balance a checkbook. I mean I learned to log into a computer, look at a screen full of numbers, and understand that those numbers were mine, that I had a right to them, that I had a responsibility to them. Here's the thing nobody talks about. I was a bookkeeper. 22 years I worked for a plumbing supply company in Rockville. 37 employees. I handled their payroll. I handled their invoices. I reconciled accounts every single month. I was good at it, and I didn't know my own bank account number. I handled payroll for a company of 37 people, and I didn't know my own bank account number. Let that sit with you, because it sat with me. It sat with me the day after the divorce, when I called the electric company, and the woman on the phone said, "What name is the account under?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "Ma'am, you don't know the name on your own electric bill?" And I wanted to explain to her. I wanted to say, that's how it worked. That's how it worked in my house. Jerry handled the bills. Jerry handled the investments. Jerry handled the taxes. I handled everything else. The children, the meals, the holidays, the in-laws, the school forms, the doctor's appointments, the emotional temperature of every room I walked into. But the money? That was his. I can't call that theft. I need to be honest about that. Jerry didn't hide the money. He didn't lock me out. He just handled it. The same way his father handled it. The same way every man on his side of the family handled it. And I let him. Every month for 34 years, I handed him my own competence and said, "Here, you carry this. I don't want it." So there I was, 71 years old, sitting in a financial advisor's office for the first time in my life. And this woman, Janet Okafor, half my age, sharp as a tack, she slid a laptop across the desk and said, "Show me what you know." I looked at that screen. I looked at her, and I said, "I know nothing." And Janet didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She said, "Then we start from nothing." She taught me what a brokerage account was. She taught me how to read a statement. She sat next to me while I logged into my own bank account for the first time. My account, in my name, with my money. And I remember my hands on the keyboard, feeling like I was learning to drive at 71. That clumsy, that basic, that necessary. It took me 4 months before I could check my balance without my heart racing. 6 months before I understood what my investments were doing. A year before I made my first independent financial decision. I moved money from one fund to another. And I called Rose afterward and said, "I just moved $6,000 with my own hands." And Rose said, "About damn time." Now let me tell you what changed. It wasn't the money. It was the knowing. It was looking at a screen and understanding that I could survive. That if everything fell apart tomorrow, I would know what I had and what I owed and what I could do. That knowledge, it's not power, it's oxygen. And I'd been holding my breath for 34 years. Number 2, I learned to travel alone. And this one started with a postcard. 1994. Rose Battaglia, my best friend, the woman who's been telling me the truth since 1978. Rose came to me with 2 plane tickets. Portugal, 2 weeks. She'd been saving for a year. She said, "Lorraine, we're going. It's booked." I went home and told Jerry. He didn't say no. I want to be clear about that. Jerry didn't say, "You can't go." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just stopped talking. 3 days. 3 full days he didn't say a word to me that wasn't necessary. Pass the salt. I'll be home late. Nothing else. No warmth. No eye contact across the room. Just winter in our own house. He didn't say I couldn't go. He just stopped talking. And I knew what that silence meant. I cancelled the trip. I told Rose I couldn't make it, something about the kids, something about the timing. She looked at me the way she always looked at me when I made an excuse. She didn't argue. She went alone. 2 weeks later, a postcard arrived. A photograph of some cliffside town, white buildings, blue water. Rose wrote on the back, "You would have loved this. Next time, don't ask permission." I put that postcard in my nightstand drawer, and it stayed there for 11 years. Every time I opened that drawer, I saw it, that blue water, that handwriting. Don't ask permission. 11 years. In 2016, I was 72, divorced, living alone for the first time since I was 20. I bought a plane ticket to Lisbon by myself. One ticket, my credit card, my passport that I'd renewed 6 months earlier because Rose said, "Get the damn passport, Lorraine." And I stood on a cliff that looked like the one in the photograph. And I know this sounds like a movie. I know this sounds too neat, but I'm telling you what happened. I stood on that cliff and I felt the wind and I thought, I'm here. I'm standing in a place I was supposed to stand 11 years ago, and I'm alone, and I'm not afraid. I threw that postcard away when I got home, not because I was angry at Rose, because I didn't need it anymore. The postcard was a promise I hadn't kept, and now I had. You want to know what Jerry's silence cost me? It cost me 11 years of cliffs, 11 years of blue water, 11 years of learning that my feet could carry me somewhere without a man deciding whether the silence would lift. But here's where I have to be honest. Jerry's silence was Jerry's silence, but my cancellation was mine. He didn't take the ticket out of my hand. I put it down. I chose the peace of that house over the cliffs. Every time I chose his comfort over my life, that was my hand doing it. I have to own that. Because if I don't own it, I'm still the woman who waits for permission, and I'm not that woman anymore. Number 3. I learned to say no to my own children. And this is the one that breaks my heart to tell you, because the first two, the money, the travel, those I can talk about with some distance. But this one? This one lives in my chest. 2019. My daughter Diane called me on a Thursday evening. Would I take the kids Saturday? She needed a break. And I said yes, the way I always said yes, because I love those grandchildren, and I love Diane, and what kind of mother says no? The next Thursday she called again. Saturday again. I said yes. The Thursday after that, and the Thursday after that. 4 weekends in a row. Now. The 5th Thursday Diane called, and I had plans. Rose had talked me into a pottery class at the community centre. I'd signed up 3 weeks earlier. I was nervous about it, 75 years old, sitting at a wheel for the first time, feeling ridiculous. But I wanted to go. I wanted something that was mine. I said, "Diane, I can't this Saturday. I have plans." Silence. Not angry silence, not dramatic silence, just nothing. The same nothing Jerry used to give me when I said something he didn't like. That careful, punishing quiet, and my stomach dropped. Because I recognized it instantly. I knew that silence. I'd lived inside that silence for 34 years. Jerry's silence. The silence that said, without saying, "You're disappointing me. You're failing at the one thing you're supposed to do. Be available. Be ready. Be there." The silence on the other end of that phone, it was Jerry's silence, coming out of my own daughter. Now, I need you to hear me. Diane is not a bad person. Diane is a wonderful mother who is exhausted and stretched thin and doing her best. But she learned something in our house. She learned that when you need something from someone and they don't give it, you go quiet. You withdraw. You let the silence do the work. She learned that from watching Jerry and me. She learned it from watching me fold every time the house went cold. And she didn't know she'd learned it. That's the part that makes me want to weep. She didn't know she was doing it. It was just how our family worked, how we communicated what we couldn't say. You're still here. And maybe you're here because you recognize that silence. Maybe someone in your life uses it, your partner, your child, your mother. Maybe you use it. I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you next is the part I almost couldn't say out loud. I called Diane back the next morning, and I said, I love you, and I am not available every Saturday. And that silence you gave me last night, I need you to know where it comes from. It comes from our house. It comes from your father and me, and I'm not going to let it work on me anymore. Not from him, not from you, not from anyone. She cried. I cried. And then she said something she'd said to me years ago in a different conversation, back when I was still married and slowly vanishing. She said, You're doing it again, Mom. You're disappearing. And this time, for the first time, I wasn't disappearing. I was appearing. I was standing in my own kitchen saying no to my own daughter, and I was shaking, and I was right. She learned it somewhere, and that somewhere was our house, my house. I can't be angry at her for speaking the only language we taught her, but I can teach her a new one. I can teach both of us a new one. Number 4. I learned to hire someone to fix what's broken. Now this one I can almost laugh about. Almost. 2007. I'd been divorced 2 years. I was living in my first apartment alone, a 1-bedroom in Tacoma Park. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. And the kitchen faucet started leaking. Drip, drip, drip. Not a flood, not an emergency, just a steady, small leak that left a rust stain in the sink and kept me awake at 2 in the morning if the bedroom door was open. 6 weeks. I lived with that leak for 6 weeks. And here's the part that shames me to tell you. In those 6 weeks, I picked up the phone and called Jerry. Twice. The first time, I dialed the whole number, heard it ring, and hung up before he answered. The second time, I got his voicemail. His new voicemail, with his new wife's voice on the greeting. I hung up so fast I almost dropped the phone. I called my ex-husband to fix a $40 leak. Twice. Before I remembered, I was a grown woman with a phone book. The third time I picked up the phone, I called a plumber. A man named Victor showed up in 45 minutes, replaced a washer, charged me $40, and was gone before my tea was cold. And then I sat on my kitchen floor and cried. Not because I was sad, not because I missed Jerry, because of the absurdity. 6 weeks. 6 weeks I'd listen to that drip, because somewhere deep in my bones I believed that fixing things was a man's job, that a leaking faucet was not my department, that I needed to call Gerald Mackey, a man who no longer lived with me, no longer loved me, no longer owed me a single thing, to come fix a washer that cost $4. You know what that faucet taught me? It taught me that dependence doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a dripping sink you won't fix because you've been trained, not told, trained to believe you can't. Nobody ever said to me, "Lorraine, women don't fix faucets." Nobody had to. I absorbed it the way I absorbed everything else, through watching, through silence, through 34 years of Jerry getting up when something broke, and me stepping aside to let him. After Victor left, I made a list. Everything in that apartment that was broken or needed attention. A cabinet hinge, a window that stuck, a light switch that sparked when you flipped it. I called people for every single one, paid for every single one with my own money, and every time someone came and went and the thing was fixed, I felt something shift. Not pride exactly, something quieter than pride. Relief. Relief that I was allowed to solve my own problems, that no one was going to stop me. The faucet isn't the point. The faucet was never the point. The point is who you believe is allowed to fix things. And for 40 years, I believed it wasn't me. Number 5. I learnt to sit in a quiet house and not reach for the remote. This is the one that goes the deepest. The other 4, the money, the travel, the children, the repairs, those are things you do. This one is something you are, or something you become, or something you finally let yourself be. Let me take you somewhere first. 1998, Thanksgiving. We drove to Allentown to spend it with Jerry's parents. Helen Mackey, Jerry's mother, was 84 years old. She'd had a stroke the year before. She was in a wheelchair, and she cooked that entire Thanksgiving dinner from that chair. I watched her. I watched her wheel herself from the counter to the stove to the table. I watched her reach up to stir the gravy. I watched her hands shake as she carved the turkey. She carved it, not Jerry's father. Jerry's father sat in his chair in the living room and waited. He waited for her to call him to the table. He waited for her to serve his plate. He waited for her to bring him seconds. And Helen did all of it. From a wheelchair, 84 years old, and she was smiling. She served Thanksgiving from a wheelchair, and she was smiling. And I wanted to scream. I didn't scream, I smiled back. I helped clear the dishes. I said, "Helen, that was wonderful," because that's what you said. That's what a good daughter-in-law said. That's what a good woman said. You praised the sacrifice. You honored the service. You didn't say, "Why is your husband sitting in that chair while you serve him from a wheelchair?" You didn't say it because you weren't supposed to see it. And if you saw it, you weren't supposed to name it. I saw it. I couldn't name it for 10 more years. Helen wasn't wrong, I have to say that. She loved the only way she knew how. Service was her language. That kitchen was her kingdom. And maybe, the serving made her feel alive. I can't take that from her. But I watched her face when she thought nobody was looking. When she was wheeling herself back to the kitchen for the third time, and the smile was gone. And what was left was just a woman who didn't know what she'd be if she ever stopped. That was the template. That was what I was supposed to become. And I almost did. After the divorce, I filled every silence. Television from the moment I woke up. Radio in the kitchen. Phone calls to Rose, to Diane, to anyone. If the apartment was quiet for more than 10 minutes, I'd find a sound to fill it. Because silence, real silence, with nobody else in the house, that silence sounded like a question I didn't want to answer. The question was, who are you when you're not taking care of someone? 2009, a Sunday in February. I woke up and I didn't turn on the television. I don't know why, I just didn't. I made a cup of tea and I sat in my living room and I let the silence sit with me. 3 hours. 3 hours I sat in that room with nothing but my own thoughts and the sound of traffic outside and the radiator clicking. And for the first hour I was terrified. I kept reaching for the remote, kept reaching for my phone, kept wanting to call someone, anyone, just to hear a voice that wasn't mine. But I didn't. I sat there. And somewhere in the second hour, the terror turned into something else, something I didn't have a word for then. I have one now. It was freedom. The freedom of not being needed, the freedom of not performing, the freedom of sitting in a room and not having to be someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's anything. Just Lorraine, just me. 75 years old and meeting myself for the first time, I asked God to send me someone. For years after the divorce, that was my prayer. Send me someone. I didn't specify who, I just didn't want to be alone. Then I realized maybe he already did. Maybe he sent me back to myself. Maybe the silence was the answer, and I'd been too afraid to hear it. Number 6. I learned to walk away from a bad date in 20 minutes. Rose called me in 2021. She said, "There's a man at my church, widowed, nice looking. You should have coffee with him." I said, "Rose, I'm 77. I'm not dating." Rose said, "You're not dead either. Go have coffee." His name was Arthur Delaney. We met at a restaurant in Bethesda, a nice place, white tablecloths, the kind of place where you feel like you should sit up straight. Arthur arrived 4 minutes late, which is fine. He apologized, which is fine. Then he ordered for both of us without asking me what I wanted. And I thought, all right, maybe he's nervous. Maybe he's old-fashioned. Let it go. He talked about himself for the next 16 minutes. I know it was 16 because I looked at my watch after the first 10. And then I looked again when I decided. In those 16 minutes, Arthur told me about his career, his golf handicap, his 3 trips to Scotland, his late wife's cooking, best pot roast in Montgomery County, and his opinion on what women his age should be doing to stay active. He interrupted me twice. The first time I was telling him about my trip to Lisbon. The second time I was telling him I had grandchildren. Both times he redirected the conversation back to himself before I finished my sentence. Then he looked at me, smiled, and I'll give him this, he had a nice smile, and said, "You look great for your age." For my age. I put down my napkin. I set it next to my plate, neatly, because Lorraine Mackey does things neatly even when she's finished with a man. And I said, "Thank you for dinner, Arthur. I hope you have a lovely evening." And I drove home with the windows down. Now, I want to tell you what I felt in that car, because it wasn't anger. I wasn't angry at Arthur. Arthur is Arthur. He's a man who talks about himself and orders for women and thinks, "For your age," is a compliment. He'll find someone who doesn't mind. That's not my business. What I felt was this. I felt the distance. The distance between the woman who cancelled Portugal in 1994 because a man stopped talking to her, and the woman who left a restaurant in 2021 because a man wouldn't stop talking to her. That distance, that is everything. That is 27 years of learning, 27 years of Portugal and Fawcett's and silent Sundays, and saying no to my own daughter, and opening my own bank account, and sitting in my own quiet, and finding out that the person inside the silence was someone worth knowing. I didn't leave because Arthur was awful. I left because I finally knew what I was worth. And what I was worth was not 16 minutes of a man who couldn't hear me. I'd already given 34 years of that. I didn't have 16 more minutes to spare. You're listening to me, and maybe you're thinking you can't do these things. Maybe you're 73 and you've never travelled alone. Maybe you're 68 and your son still expects Sunday dinner every week, and you've never once said no. Maybe you're 80 and there's a faucet dripping right now in your kitchen and you're waiting for someone to fix it. I'm not telling you to leave anyone. I'm not telling you men are the problem. Jerry wasn't the problem. The problem was that I believed I was half a person without him. The problem was that nobody, not Helen, not my mother, not anyone, ever told me that a woman alone is not a woman broken. A woman alone is a woman who finally has room to stand up straight. The woman who can do these 6 things, she isn't rare because she's better than anyone. She's rare because she stopped waiting. That's all I did. I stopped waiting. And I started writing things down. The week after the divorce, I went to a shop in Silver Spring and bought a small leather notebook, fit in my purse. And I decided I would write one thing in it every day. One thing I did for myself. Not for Jerry, not for the kids, not for anyone else. For me. Day 1, I wrote, "Opened the electric bill." That's it. That's where it started. 11 notebooks ago. I'm on my 11th notebook now. Today's entry. I don't even remember what I wrote this morning. Something small. They're all small. That's the secret nobody tells you about independence. It's not one big dramatic moment. It's not walking out of a restaurant or standing on a cliff in Portugal. It's a Tuesday. It's a Tuesday and you pay your own electric bill and you don't call anyone to tell you it's okay. You just do it. And then you write it down. And then you do it again tomorrow. Patrick called me last Sunday, my son. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked about my pottery class. He said, "Mom, are you any good?" And I said, "Patrick, I am terrible, and I go every Saturday." And he laughed, and I laughed. And that's what it sounds like. Two people who almost lost each other finding their way back. He's learning too. We all are. You don't need 11 notebooks. You just need day one. You just need one envelope you open with your own hands, one ticket you buy with your own name on it, one silence you don't fill, one table you leave, one moment where you choose yourself, not because you're selfish, but because you finally realized you're allowed. If this woman's story made you feel something, share it with a woman who needs to hear it. My apartment is quiet tonight. It's late. The notebook is closed. The pen is next to it on the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where I couldn't open a bill 21 years ago. The television is off. The phone is in the other room, and I'm not reaching for the remote.